It's a non-renewable resource, so we need to treat it like that. And I think it's everyone's responsibility to take care of the soil. It provides many different functions. For example, it provides us food, feed, clean drinking water, and of course a stable place to build our houses. And it is therefore very important not to take the soil beneath our feet as granted. The soil management is one of the things that should be included in policies.
Thank you, Dr. Chantal, for joining us today in this conversation. So to start up with the conversation, will you please explain us what is soil and what makes soil soil?
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me. Well, soil is the unconsolidated mineral or organic material on the immediate surface on the earth. Well, it is important for all life on Earth as it provides many different functions. For example, it provides us food, feed, clean drinking water, and of course a stable place to build our houses. And it is therefore very important not to take the soil beneath our feet as granted, but we need to take good care of our soils.
Okay, yeah. So when you're saying we need to take good care of the soil, so does it have any impact on human health?
Of course, yes. Yeah, well, it has, of course, an impact on human health. When soils are degrading, when people lose their houses, but also soils contain a lot of nutrients, and plants take up these nutrients from the soil. And if there's a lack in nutrients, it is obvious that also there's a lack in nutrients in our food crops. And that's why humans get less nutrition in their crops. And of course, if you treat your soils badly, it has consequences on the yield. So quantitatively and qualitatively, it has impacts on the health of humans and on the food production we're producing. Yes. Plants take up a certain amount of nutrients, and if you have not enough nutrients in the soil, it has a consequence for the qualitative and quantitative amounts and quality of the crop itself. But if you have an excessive amount of nutrients, well, I'm coming from the Netherlands in Europe, we have an excessive amount of nutrients. So if you have too much nutrients in the soil, it will have consequences because plants can only take up a certain amount of nutrients, and excessive amount of nutrients will leach to surface waters or groundwater. So it is threatening our drinking water, but these kind of things it's really threatening our environment.
So when you say that there are excess amount of nutrients, what is the cause of this particular thing?
Well, in the Netherlands and in some parts of Europe, the dominant cause is the amount of animals we have. Okay. We have just too much manure. Well, in many parts of the world, there's a lack in manure, but we have excessive amounts of manure. So we also have the nitrate directive, for example, which is the European and Dutch policymakers are making policies that we only can apply a certain amount of manure per hectare on our arable soils. And you see in the Netherlands that much of this manure is being exported to neighboring countries, just to prevent that too much nutrients are entering the soil and threatens our drinking water.
Okay, that's good to listen. So, so they are working on some policies, is it?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning something regarding environment, yeah? So when we're speaking about environment, does soil has any sort of impact on the climate?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Yeah. Because the soil is the biggest carbon sink in the world. And one of the soil functions is carbon sequestration. So then you capture carbon CO2 from the air. You can capture it in the soil. So it's able to transmit CO2 from the air into the soil. This can be done, for example, by using better agricultural practices, management practices, or by adding carbon from inside or outside the farm to the soil. For example, green manure or catch crops. You can have more compost or manure on the soil to capture more carbon in the soil. An example is when you plow your land, for example, then oxygen will enter the soil, and when oxygen and carbon are in contact with each other, you will produce the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide, CO2. So when you reduce or even stop plowing practices, carbon will not get in contact with this oxygen, and then the carbon will stay in the soil. So that's a practice farmers can take to reduce the loss of carbon in our soil. So we need to prevent that carbon that is stored in the soil is going to the atmosphere as CO2.
Okay. So the CO2 emissions are directly impacting the climate. That's what you're saying, is it so?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So other than the CO2 emissions, are there any other risks of having a degraded soil?
Yes, yeah, there are many different, well, basically you can divide it in three categories. You can have physical degradation, and you think of erosion, for example. You can have chemical degradation, which is, for example, that carbon breaks down as CO2 into the atmosphere. But you can also have biological degradation. That means that soil animals are dying, or there are less animals in the soil, like earthworms or these kind of things. And all over the globe, you see that that soils are not degrading at the same pace or the same degradation rate at the same time. So that depends on where you are at the globe, and also whether the soil is dominantly degrading physically, biological, or chemically. That also differs around the globe.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, soil degradation, that depends on different factors. So you can imagine there are some natural factors that cause degradation, like climate, organism, where you have slopes in the area, hills or mountains. The origin of the soil, is it a clay soil or a sandy soil? And the age of the soil is also very important. For example, if you go to the humid tropics, you often see these very well-developed red soils. Well, these soils are very old, very degraded. So there's also natural degradation taking place around the globe, and depends on where you are on the world. But when humans do not treat the soil well, for example, when you have a slopey area, you plow perpendicular to the contour lines instead of along the contour lines, or using no-till or reduced till, then the soil gets more vulnerable for example, erosion, and that has all kinds of consequences, like landslides. Mainly landslides and erosion are the consequence of that. So it really depends on where you are at this globe.
Okay.
And these natural factors, whether you have degradation or not.
Okay.
I can say maybe a little bit about the natural system, that it's dominantly in an equilibrium. Well, when you have a natural system, it's in an equilibrium state. And when you have external drivers, for example, the management, land management or climate change, that are kind of drivers that push this system out of its equilibrium. and earth until a certain tipping point. And well, a soil is resilient for these drivers until a certain point. But how harder these drivers are pushing, the more it gets out of this equilibrium, and when it will reach this tipping point, it can go to a certain state, a new state, and that's hardly irreversible compared to the state where it was in before. So when that happens, you can imagine that it has consequences for life on Earth, because it cannot deliver certain functions anymore. The soil, when it degrades until this new state, you can think of that it's causing food insecurity, eutrophication of surface water, risk of flooding is increasing, drinking water can be polluted. So yeah, well, that's really, therefore it is really important that we as soil scientists should not should take care of these drivers. We need to reduce these drivers, the impact of these drivers, so it will not end up in this new state. So we need to combat climate change, and we need to introduce different management techniques that cause less pressure on the soil.
Okay. Do you think it's only the soil scientists that have to take care of this particular aspect, or is it each and every one have to work towards this?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I think it's each and everyone needs to take care of this or soil. As I said before, you should not take it as granted, as many people do. It's something very special. It's a non-renewable resource, so we need to treat it like that. And I think it's everyone's responsibility to take care of the soil and to put it in a context of the whole system. As the soil is in contact with the atmosphere, it's in contact with water bodies. So well, there are living animals in the soil. There are growing crops and other vegetation on the soil. So it's the whole system that needs to be taken care of.
Okay, yeah. So you were saying that there were some policies that were made in Netherlands, yeah? So do you think a policy is a mandatory thing to prevent any sort of soil degradation? Do you think there should be some policy that has to be implemented?
Yes, and I'm very happy to see that the soil is getting more and more attention, also among policymakers. Well, the nitrate directive, for example, was introduced because water eutrophication or drinking water was polluted. So that's why the government took action that we need to reduce the amount of manure we are spreading on our soils in the Netherlands. But I definitely think soil management is one of the things that should be included in policies. Okay. And even sign or point some areas where certain soil management is not even possible anymore, or is not allowed anymore. In the Netherlands, we have, for example, Nature 2000 areas, it's called. So that are protected nature areas. And we're now debating in the Netherlands whether there should be a buffer zone around these nature areas where no farming can take place anymore. Okay. Because farming is polluting these nature areas.
Okay. So do you think the fertilizers and whatever manure that they are using as a part of agriculture system, do you think that has an impact on the organisms that are living in the soil?
Yes, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I know of a study that is about a soil-borne disease called
Uh-huh.
in banana plantations. It's something very different than I'm doing in the Netherlands. But as you can imagine, it's like when you have anorexia or you're obese. It's both unhealthy. So you need to find that equilibrium in between to have healthy soil, because when you have obesity or you have anorexia, you're more vulnerable for diseases, for pests. And that's exactly what we see in soil. When we put too much nutrients on the soil, it's getting more vulnerable. And when you have too little nutrients in the soil, it's also getting more vulnerable.
Okay. So, is there anything that you would like to tell to our listeners?
Mm, well, as you said, I think it's a responsibility of everyone, and I really hope I make the listeners a little bit more aware of the importance of soils and in our life, and that it's not just there. It's something very special. It's a non-renewable resource. And we should really take care of it. Otherwise, our next generations don't have enough food anymore, don't have a place to live anymore. Um, yeah, so we really need to take good care of our soils.